A perfectly straight road cuts across a desert, defying the horizon. How did ancient builders achieve such impossible precision long before satellites or lasers? This video will reveal the ingenious secrets of ancient surveying, the forgotten tools and methods that allowed empires to carve unwavering lines through mountains and across continents. You will discover exactly how they turned geometry into stone, creating roads that shaped history. We will uncover how they used the stars to guide them, and how a simple cross of wood and string could plot a path for 1,000 years. What does it truly mean to draw a straight line across an unpredictable world? The surveyor's most important tool was not a map, but a cross of wood and string. Picture a Roman agrimensor, an ancient land measurer, standing atop a newly conquered hill. The wind tugs at his cloak, but his focus is absolute, fixed on a curious instrument planted firmly in the earth before him. This is the Groma. At its heart, a vertical staff supports a rotating horizontal crossarm. From the end of each arm, a simple plumb line hangs, a weight suspended on a cord. It looks almost like a child's toy, yet this device would plot the bones of an empire. By sighting across the hanging cords, the surveyor could align two of them perfectly with a distant marker, like a stake driven into the ground 100 paces away. Those two cords now defined an impeccably straight line of sight. Then, by rotating the crossarm 90 degrees and sighting along the other pair of cords, he could instantly create a perfect right angle branching off from that first line. With nothing more than this, the Roman world was drawn into a grid. This process, called Centuriation, carved the countryside into vast, orderly squares for farming and settlement. But that same principle of right angles and straight lines was the secret to their roads. To lay out a long, straight road, teams of surveyors would use a chain of Groma. One man would set his instrument, sight a line, and direct a second man to place a marker far ahead, exactly on that line. That second man would then set up his own Groma, sight back to confirm the alignment, and project the line even further. Step by step, mile by mile, they transferred a single, unwavering line across the landscape, a thread of intention pulled taut across hills and valleys. The Groma made geometry physical. It turned the abstract lines of a planner's scroll into a path you could walk, a road that would not waver for centuries. Yet a straight line is only half the battle. What happens when that line must climb a mountain or descend into a valley? A road can be perfectly aligned but utterly useless if it becomes a river of mud with every rain or a treacherous, uneven slope for carts and travelers. The Romans understood this deeply. Their genius was not just in drawing a line, but in making that line a permanent, functional artery of empire. For this, they needed to master not just direction, but elevation. They needed to find the horizontal in a tilted world. Their solution was an instrument of elegant simplicity called the Corobates. Think of it not as a tool, but as a portable piece of calm, flat sea. It was essentially a very long wooden bench, perhaps 20 feet in length, with a shallow groove carved meticulously along its top. Before a day's work began, an assistant would carefully fill this groove with water. Then the master engineer would kneel and watch. He wasn't looking for movement but for perfect stillness. The surface of that water, by the unyielding law of gravity, would always settle into a perfectly level plane. By sighting along the surface or by using small vertical markers at each end of the bench, he could determine a true horizontal line with astonishing precision. This simple act of observation translated a fundamental force of nature into a practical building instruction. His team could now mark exactly how much earth to cut away from a hillside or how much fill to bring in to create a level roadbed. This was the secret to the famous Roman road foundation, the multi-layered masterpiece of stone and gravel. Without a level base, that foundation would fail. Water would pool, the layers would shift, and the road would collapse. The Corobates ensured that every section, whether on a rolling plain or a steep mountain pass, had the gentle, consistent slope needed for drainage and stability. It turned a geometric idea into a physical reality that could last 1,000 years. So now we have two dimensions mastered, the straight line and the level plane. But to truly conquer distance, to plot a road across a continent, these ancient engineers needed a third. They needed a way to see the invisible, to measure the vast spaces between their markers with a confidence that matched their ambition. They needed a tool that could turn the entire landscape into a numbers, but the landscape itself could lie. Distant hills could shift in the haze, and rivers could bend, tricking the eye. To plot a line across a continent, these engineers needed a reference that was absolute, unchanging, and visible from anywhere on Earth. They needed to look beyond the horizon to the clockwork of the heavens. As dusk settled over a desert surveying camp, the work did not end, it simply changed direction. The master surveyor would turn his gaze upward, waiting for the first pinpricks of light to pierce the violet sky. His most reliable guide was not a tool of wood and water, but a single, steadfast star. In the northern hemisphere, the star we call Polaris, the North Star, holds a nearly fixed position in the sky, the pivot point around which the entire celestial sphere appears to turn. By carefully observing its position, a skilled observer could determine true north with a precision no terrestrial landmark could ever offer. They might use a simple sighting staff, aligning its shadow with the star's position, or observe its rotation around the celestial pole. This gave them an immutable axis, a cosmic line drawn from the observer straight to the pole of the sky. With this celestial north-south line firmly established, they could then use their Groma to create a perfect east-west perpendicular, building a grid upon the very foundations of the universe. But the sun was their daytime ally. The most critical moment came at local noon, when the sun reached its highest point in the sky. By planting a vertical gnomon, a simple stake, and marking the tip of its shadow throughout the day, they could find the shortest shadow. That shadow pointed directly to true north in the northern hemisphere. This solar method, repeated day after day as they advanced, allowed them to constantly check and correct their alignment. This celestial discipline was not theoretical. It was the bedrock of history's greatest infrastructure projects. Imagine the Roman engineers tasked with laying the Via Traiana, a road stretching through the arid, landmark-scarce deserts of what is now Jordan. With endless sand and shifting dunes, there were no mountains to sight upon, no rivers to follow. Their only constant companions were the blazing sun by day and the glittering stars by night. By tying their work to these celestial markers, they could project a straight line for hundreds of miles with breathtaking confidence. The same principle guided the planners of the Silk Road routes across the Taklamakan Desert, where caravans faced a sea of sand. The stars overhead were their only reliable map. This practice represents a profound synthesis of knowledge, where practical engineering met advanced astronomy. It connected the gritty, physical work of moving stone and earth to the majestic, eternal patterns of the cosmos. They were not just building roads, they were weaving the order of the heavens into the fabric of the earth. Yet, knowing your direction and staying level is one thing. To truly bind an empire together with these roads, they needed to solve one final, monumental puzzle. They needed to speak a common language of distance, to answer the most fundamental question of any journey: how far is it? And for that, they would invent a unit of measure so ingenious, so perfectly human in its scale, that it would echo through millennia. The most advanced tool in the ancient surveyor's kit was often another human being. Before the Groma was unpacked or the Corobates leveled, the first act of creation was profoundly simple. One man would plant a tall, straight pole into the ground. A second man, perhaps 1,000 paces away, would do the same. Then, with a series of shouted commands and arm signals, the first would direct the second to shift his pole left or right until it vanished perfectly behind the first from the viewer's perspective. In that moment, with nothing but wood, human eyes, and a shouted signal, an invisible line of perfect straightness was pulled taut between them. This was the genesis of every great road. But a single line between 2 points is a fragile thing. To extend it across miles, they built a living chain. A third worker would move far beyond the second pole, using the first 2 as his guide to plant a third exactly on their shared line. Then a fourth and a fifth, each new marker extending the line like a stitch being drawn through the landscape. This method, called ranging, transformed an abstract direction into a physical procession of markers that anyone could see and follow. The true test of skill came when the land itself fought back. A valley would dip between 2 poles, breaking the line of sight. Here, the human chain showed its ingenuity. The team on the high ground would signal to a colleague down in the valley, who would hold a pole and move laterally until his own body was aligned, becoming a temporary human marker. Once positioned, he would plant his pole, and the chain would leapfrog over the obstacle, reconnecting on the far side. It was a ballet of coordination, where a wave of an arm or the flash of a polished shield in the sunlight carried critical information across vast distances. This underscores a profound truth about these engineering marvels. The brilliance was not solely in the instruments, but in the disciplined, synchronized effort of the people who used them. A perfect line on a map meant nothing without the sweat and shouted signals that translated it into stakes in the earth. It was a partnership between the mind of the engineer and the eyes and hands of countless workers, a collaborative act that physically manifested a single, unwavering intention across the face of the world. With their straight line now marked by a series of poles marching into the distance, the real work could begin. The next challenge was one of endurance, of turning that line into a permanent scar on the earth that could withstand the weight of armies and the erosion of centuries. While the Groma mastered straight lines and right angles, it had a fundamental limitation. It could only see the world in perfect 90-degree increments, like a city grid. But the real landscape is a symphony of curves and slopes, of mountains that must be skirted and valleys that must be bridged. To truly conquer this complex terrain, Roman engineers reached back to a more sophisticated tool from their intellectual predecessors, the Greeks. This was the Dioptra, a device that could measure the world not in squares but in degrees. Picture a circular bronze disc, meticulously marked around its edge like a protractor. Mounted atop this disc was a sighting tube, similar to a small telescope without the lenses. The entire assembly could rotate smoothly on a stand, and it often featured precise leveling screws. An engineer would peer through the tube, aligning it perfectly with a distant landmark, perhaps a notch in a mountain pass he needed his road to traverse. By reading the angle on the graduated disc, he could capture that direction as a precise number. He could then turn to another point, measure that angle, and by the power of geometry, specifically triangulation, he could calculate distances and positions without ever walking the entire route. This was a revolutionary leap. If a sheer cliff blocked the straight path of a road, the surveyor no longer had to abandon his line. With the Dioptra, he could stand at a safe distance, measure the angles to points around the obstacle, and mathematically plot a smooth, efficient detour that reconnected with the original alignment miles ahead. The instrument's true genius was its versatility in the vertical plane as well. By tilting the sighting tube upward or downward, the engineer could measure the steepness of a slope. He could point it at a marker on a distant hillside and determine the exact angle of ascent. This data was crucial for planning gradients that were challenging for legions and supply carts, but not impossible. It allowed for calculated decisions, perhaps choosing a longer, gentler route around a mountain's shoulder instead of attempting a direct, punishing climb. The Dioptra represents a beautiful fusion of minds. It was born from Greek theoretical geometry and abstract thought, a culture that pondered angles and proofs. The Romans, masters of practical application, adopted this intellectual tool and put it to work building their world. They took the pure mathematics of the academy and used it to solve the dirty, physical problems of moving earth and laying stone. This instrument allowed them to bend their famous straight lines when necessary, to adapt their rigid intent to the fluid reality of the planet, all while maintaining mathematical control over every curve and incline. It was the difference between drawing with a ruler and drawing with a compass, granting them the flexibility to write their roads across any geography. Yet, even with the stars for direction and the dioptra for angles, one elemental question remained for the traveler, the merchant, and the general. How do you know how far you have come or how far you have left to go? The answer lay in the most human measurement of all, the rhythm of a soldier's march. A mountain is not a wall, it is a problem in geometry. When the direct line of sight for a road was swallowed whole by a dense, impassable forest or vanished behind the granite face of a mountain, the ancient surveyor did not surrender. He simply began to walk. His solution was a masterclass in spatial reasoning called traversing. This technique transformed an impossible straight line into a manageable series of smaller, achievable ones. Imagine the lead surveyor standing at the last clear marker before the obstacle. He cannot see his destination, but he knows it lies on the other side. He turns his dioptra, the angle measuring instrument, and sights along a new, clear path that skirts the edge of the forest. He measures this new angle carefully, and his team marks out this first short leg, perhaps a few hundred paces. At the end of that segment, he sets up his instrument again. He now has a choice: turn another measured angle to begin a second leg, slowly working his way around the barrier. Each leg is a straight line, meticulously measured for both distance and direction. The surveyor is essentially drawing a polygon on the landscape, a shape with many sides that wraps around the problem. The true test of skill came at the moment of closure. After navigating around the obstacle, the team would aim to reconnect their winding path with the original, intended line of the road on the far side. This was the critical check. By using the recorded angles and distances of each leg, the surveyor could calculate through geometry exactly where he should emerge. If his final marker landed precisely on target, the traverse was closed and the road's grand alignment remained unbroken. It was a triumph of planning over chaos. This process was far from guesswork. It demanded rigorous error correction. Tiny inaccuracies in measuring a single angle or pacing a single distance would compound with each new leg, potentially causing the final line to miss its mark by a wide margin. The skilled surveyor would use repeated measurements and geometric checks to minimize this drift, ensuring that the road, though it might bend temporarily, never forgot its ultimate destination. Traversing reveals the ancient engineer not as a rigid draftsman, but as a flexible strategist. He understood that the shortest path between 2 points was not always a literal line, but the most efficient application of intelligence over terrain. He could let the landscape dictate the temporary shape of his work without ever letting it dictate the final goal. It was a dance with nature where the surveyor led, but always with the end of the song firmly in mind. With a path plotted, whether by a single celestial line or a clever traverse, the final and most physical phase of the road's creation could begin. The straight line on the map was about to become a permanent, unyielding feature of the earth itself. Before a single stone could be laid for the road, there was a moment of profound silence. The master surveyor would stand at the chosen starting point, a place of high ground with a clear view, and he would look out across the untouched landscape. His first and most critical task was not to build but to define. He needed to create one perfect line, a segment of absolute truth in a world of curves and shadows. This was the establishment of the baseline. It began not with grand machinery, but with two simple stakes driven firmly into the earth, perhaps a few hundred paces apart. The distance between them was measured not with haste, but with a reverence for precision. Teams would use carefully calibrated measuring rods, often made of seasoned wood or metal, each length verified against a master standard. They would lay these rods end to end, checking and rechecking the alignment, ensuring not a single hair's breadth of error crept in. This measured distance became the project's sacred unit, its foundational fact. Why such obsessive care for one short stretch of ground? Because every measurement that followed, every angle sighted with the Dioptra, every mile of road projected across hills, would be calculated from this one line. A tiny mistake here, an almost imperceptible misalignment or an incorrect rod length, would not remain small. It would be magnified with every subsequent calculation, like a whisper that grows into a shout over distance. A 1-degree error at the start could mean missing a crucial mountain pass by miles at the journey's end. So this baseline was measured, leveled with the Corobates, and verified from both ends until its straightness and length were beyond any doubt. It was an act of intellectual courage, a declaration that from this point forward, the chaotic, organic world would conform to human geometry. This line was the anchor, the fixed point in the surveyor's mental universe. From its two definitive endpoints, he could now sight angles to distant peaks or valleys, using the principles of triangulation to map the entire region without ever walking its full breadth. He had created a stable platform of known dimensions from which to launch his ambition. It was from this slender thread of certainty that the bold, straight road would begin its long, unwavering reach across the continent. Geometry was the silent language spoken by every tool. The Groma, the Dioptra, the simple plumb line, these were merely translators, converting the pure, abstract truths of mathematics into physical instructions. The real power behind the straight road lay not in bronze or wood, but in the unshakable logic of Euclid's elements. Every surveyor was at heart a practical mathematician. His world was defined by triangles, circles, and parallel lines, and his greatest skill was using these shapes to measure what he could not directly touch. Consider the problem of a wide, fast-flowing river blocking the path of a planned road. Crossing it to take a measurement was dangerous, if not impossible. So the surveyor would stay safely on the near bank. He would plant two markers a precise distance apart, creating a known baseline along the river's edge. From each end of this line, he would use his Dioptra to sight a landmark on the opposite shore, perhaps a distinctive tree directly across from where he wanted his bridge. This act created a large triangle with the river's width as one unknown side. Crucially, the surveyor could then measure the two angles where his sightlines met the baseline. With one known side and two known angles, the entire triangle was now defined by geometry. He could calculate the river's exact width without getting his feet wet, using the principle of similar triangles, where shapes share the same angles and their sides are in perfect proportion. This was not magic, it was applied reasoning. It transformed an intimidating obstacle into a neat set of numbers on a wax tablet. The entire landscape became a giant geometric worksheet. A distant mountain's height could be gauged by measuring the angle to its summit from two different points, creating another solvable triangle. The gentle curve of a road around a hillside could be plotted as a series of chords within a massive, imagined circle. Every decision, from the angle of a slope to the placement of a mile marker, was governed by this mathematical framework. This intellectual discipline is what separated a meandering path from a sovereign road. It meant that a team beginning work in Gaul and a team starting in Hispania, following the same geometric principles and using the same celestial alignments, could build two segments of a road that would meet in the middle with astonishing accuracy. The straight road was therefore a line of thought made solid. It was proof that the human mind could impose its own orderly patterns upon the chaotic earth, using nothing but observation, calculation, and unwavering logic. It was a triumph of intellect every bit as monumental as the physical labor of paving it. Yet, for all this precision, the ancient world lacked one thing we take for granted: a unified map. So how did these separately surveyed roads, these threads of geometry, weave together into a connected web that spanned continents? The ultimate test of Roman engineering was not a mountain, but a miasma. South of Rome lay the Pontine Marshes, a vast, waterlogged plain where the very earth seemed to dissolve. Here, the horizon was a blur of mist and reeds, a landscape devoid of any stable reference point. Yet, this was precisely where the censor Appius Claudius Caecus decreed his great road, the Via Appia, would run. To build a straight, permanent road here was an act of defiance against nature itself. The surveyors' first challenge was the absence of solid ground. Their cherished Groma was useless without firm footing, and the Dioptra's sightlines vanished into the damp haze. Their solution was as bold as it was logical. They began by constructing long, temporary wooden causeways out into the marsh. These were not the road itself, but gigantic surveying tools. Built with painstaking leveling, these causeways became their artificial baselines, long, stable platforms stretching into the watery wilderness. From these wooden spines of certainty, they could finally take their measurements, projecting the road's line across the unstable bog. The constant enemy was water. This is where the Corobates, the water level, proved indispensable. Teams would work in concert, one man checking the level of the causeway, another checking the soggy ground ahead where the road's foundation would be built. They were not just finding level, they were creating it. The Via Appia here was not laid upon the ground, it was built above it. The surveyors directed the construction of a raised embankment, an agger, using layers of gravel, stone, and sand dug from the marshes themselves. Each layer was compacted and leveled with obsessive care, ensuring the roadbed would not sink into the soft peat. This project reveals the adaptability of Roman surveying at its finest. It was not a rigid doctrine, but a flexible set of principles. When the land offered no horizons, they built their own. When the ground would not support a path, they engineered a platform that defied it. The Via Appia through the marshes was more than a road. It was a declaration that human order could be imposed upon chaos. It transformed a treacherous, illness-ridden barrier into a vital military and economic artery, a stone ribbon of civilization stitched directly through the heart of the swamp. This triumph, however, would have meant little if a traveler could not know his progress along it. The final, universal language of the road was spoken not in angles but in steps. The desert is a master of illusion, where heat shimmers erase the horizon and dunes march with the wind. Yet across this fluid, deceptive landscape, the Nabateans carved roads of startling straightness. These were not wandering caravan tracks, but engineered highways like the one leading to their hidden capital, Petra. For a people whose wealth flowed from controlling the incense trade, time was a currency measured in water and endurance. A straight road was not a geometric luxury, it was a survival strategy, shaving days off a journey and dictating the difference between profit and peril. Here, the classical surveyor's toolkit faced its ultimate test. A Groma's plumb lines would dance in the searing wind, and a distant marker could vanish into a heat-haze mirage within minutes. The Nabateans needed a language of navigation that the desert could not erase. Their solution was one of elegant permanence. They built cairns, deliberate piles of stone stacked high on promontories. These were not random trail markers, but carefully positioned sentinels. Placed on high ground, their silhouettes would remain visible long after the details of the land had blurred into a uniform beige. In some stretches, archaeologists have found lines of dark pottery sherds placed atop the lighter sand, creating a visible dashed line on the ground itself for travelers to follow. These were guide points meant to endure, reference lines etched not on parchment but onto the very face of the wilderness. When the sun became a blinding adversary, the Nabateans turned to the cool clarity of the night. The desert sky, free of haze and city light, offered a perfect celestial map. Navigating by the stars would have been second nature to these long-distance traders. By aligning their roads with specific stars or constellations that rose or set in a consistent direction, they could maintain a true bearing across trackless sand seas. A road built to follow the setting point of a certain star, for example, would hold its line season after season, a path written in the stars and mirrored on the earth. This fusion of astronomy and pragmatism meant their roads possessed a double reliability, visible by day through stone markers and verifiable by night through the heavens. This desert surveying reveals a profound adaptation of core principles. The goal remained the same as the Romans, to create a direct, reliable route. But the methods flexed to meet the environment. Without stable soil for instruments, they used the landscape itself as a tool, building permanent cairns to create artificial horizons. Without clear landmarks, they used the unchanging stars. The straight line to Petra was therefore more than a road. It was a calibrated instrument for crossing emptiness. It transformed an intimidating, featureless expanse into a knowable, manageable space where distance could be predicted and progress measured. It turned the desert's greatest threat, its disorienting vastness, into a controlled variable. In doing so, the Nabateans did not just connect points on a map. They demonstrated that even the most hostile environment could be negotiated with intelligence, patience, and a deep reading of the natural world. A straight road was never just a path from one place to another. It was a line of authority. The same surveyor who plotted the course for a legion's march also performed a quieter, more profound act. He drew the limites. This Latin term, which gives us the word limit, referred to the long, straight boundary lines that carved newly conquered territories into a vast, orderly grid. Where the Groma had plotted a road, it now plotted an empire. After a region was pacified, teams of agrimensores would arrive not with soldiers, but with their instruments and scrolls. Their task was to impose a new reality onto the land, a geometric order called Centuriation. They would establish two main axes, the Cardo Maximus running north-south and the Decumanus Maximus running east-west, often aligned with a new military road. From this central cross, they would extend a perfect grid of squares, each typically measuring 710 meters on a side, a unit called a centuria. This was not abstract cartography. These lines, marked by boundary stones and drainage ditches, defined actual parcels of land. These squares were the blueprint for colonization, awarded to retired legionnaires as farms or allocated for public use. A veteran who had marched the straight roads to victory could now spend his retirement tending a plot of earth that was itself defined by those same straight lines. The surveyor's work thus served a dual master. The road moved armies and goods, binding the empire together. The limites distributed land and population, controlling it. They transformed the chaotic, organic landscape of a conquered tribe into a rational, taxable, and administrable Roman province. The straight line became the ultimate tool of governance. It allowed a bureaucrat in Rome to understand a distant territory not as a confusing mosaic of hills and forests, but as a ledger of numbered squares, each with a known owner and expected yield. This systematic organization of space was a psychological conquest as much as a physical one. It replaced local traditions of land use with an impersonal, universal geometry. To live within the grid was to accept the logic of Rome. The enduring evidence of this is written across landscapes from Tunisia to the Po Valley, where the ghostly lines of ancient Roman field boundaries can still be seen from the air, etched into the modern countryside like faint pencil lines on a well-used map. The road was the empire's artery, but the limites were its nervous system, a silent grid of control that made every acre of territory legible, manageable, and Roman. But the most elegant level of all required no instrument at all, only a quiet observation of nature's own balance. Before the Corobates was built, and long after its last wooden beam rotted away, the most fundamental leveling tool was simply water itself. In its stillness, water holds a perfect secret. The surface of a calm pond, the water in a shallow ditch, even the liquid inside a length of animal skin stretched between 2 points, all of it obeys one unwavering rule. Water always seeks its own level. This simple, observable fact became a universal tool of precision, accessible to any culture that needed to build on a grand scale. A surveyor could dig a long, straight trench along the path of a future road and carefully fill it with water. By marking points along the trench where the water's surface touched the sides, he created a continuous line of points that were all perfectly level with one another. This gave him a true horizontal reference that could stretch for hundreds of feet, far longer than any wooden beam. The principle scaled beautifully. For even longer distances, like plotting the gentle, consistent slope of an aqueduct across rolling hills, teams could use connected water levels. Imagine 2 sighting tubes, each mounted on a stake, linked by a long hose. When water was poured in, it would settle to the same height in both tubes, no matter how far apart they were or what the ground between them did. By sighting across the water line in each tube, workers at separate stations could confirm they were working from the same exact plane of elevation. This was not high technology, it was high understanding. It represents a profound moment in engineering where humans stopped trying to force the world into alignment and instead learned to read the alignments the world naturally provided. They harnessed a basic physical law as a tool. This water-level technique was so reliable and so universally understood that it appears independently across continents and centuries. The builders of the vast canal systems in ancient China, the engineers of Mesopotamian irrigation networks, and the architects of Egyptian temples all would have recognized the principle. It was the great democratizer of precision, requiring no rare materials or complex craftsmanship, only careful observation and patience. This highlights a beautiful truth about these ancient achievements. While we marvel at the complex instruments like the Dioptra, some of the most effective solutions came from a deep, intuitive partnership with the natural world. The straight road did not conquer nature through brute force alone, but often by listening to its quiet, consistent laws and then writing those laws in stone. The water in that trench was more than a tool, it was a teacher, demonstrating that true horizontality was not something humans invented, but something they could discover anywhere with the simplest of means. The precision of these instruments meant nothing without the person who held them. Behind every straight line and perfect right angle stood a figure of immense trust and skill, the Roman Agrimensor. He was not a solitary genius but a product of a sophisticated system. These master surveyors were often drawn from the ranks of military veterans, men already disciplined in order, logistics, and following complex command. Their new battlefield was the landscape itself, and their weapon was geometry. To standardize this crucial work, Rome developed a formal body of knowledge and practice, the Corpus Agrimensorum. This was more than a manual, it was the curriculum for an entire profession. Training went far beyond learning to sight a Groma. An apprentice had to master the mathematics of triangles and circles, the astronomy needed for celestial alignment, and the hydraulics for understanding drainage. But perhaps most surprisingly, he also had to become well-versed in law. The lines he drew were not just guidelines for construction, they were legal boundaries that defined property, taxation, and inheritance. A misplaced boundary stone could spark generations of conflict between families or communities. Therefore, the surveyor had to be an expert witness. capable of defending his measurements in a court of law and interpreting the complex legal statutes that governed land division. This professionalization was the empire's secret weapon for consistency. Whether an agrimensor was working in the misty highlands of Britannia or the sun-baked plains of North Africa, he followed the same principles, used the same tools, and upheld the same standards. A land parcel measured in Gaul would be the same size as one measured in Syria. This reliability was what made the Roman system scalable and trustworthy. The surveyor thus occupied a unique and powerful social role. He was a blend of soldier, engineer, and bureaucrat. His work required absolute integrity, for the stakes were monumental. The roads he plotted moved armies that secured borders. The limites he drew allocated the wealth of the empire. A corrupt or careless surveyor could weaken the state's control and its revenue. His signature, often literally carved into a boundary stone, carried the full authority of Rome. He was the human interface between the abstract power of the state and the physical reality of the land, turning imperial will into permanent, immutable lines on the earth. His legacy was not in monuments, but in the enduring order of the countryside, an order so sound that its ghost still shapes fields and property lines across Europe today. Yet for all this systematic genius, one profound question lingers. How do we truly know the extent of their achievements? Our understanding does not come from ancient textbooks alone, but from the silent, stubborn evidence they left behind in the most unexpected places. The straight line was an ideal, but the land was a reality of grit and human error. Over dozens of miles, the most disciplined surveying team would inevitably accumulate tiny mistakes. A plumb line might sway in a breeze, a measuring rod could be set down a fraction of an inch off, or an angle might be misread by a hair. Individually, these errors were negligible. But compounded over distance, the relentless logic of geometry could turn them into a major problem. A deviation of just one part in 1,000 meant that for every mile of road, the path would drift over 5 feet from its intended line. Over 50 miles, that drift could become a staggering 250 feet, enough to miss a crucial mountain pass or a vital river ford entirely. The engineers knew this. Their genius was not in achieving impossible perfection, but in building systems to catch and correct these errors before they grew beyond control. One of their most powerful tools was the periodic return to an absolute truth. At regular intervals, perhaps every 10 or 20 miles, the lead surveyor would halt the terrestrial work and look back to the heavens. He would re-establish true north by observing Polaris or the sun at noon, creating a fresh celestial baseline. Then he would measure the angle between this perfect celestial line and the actual path his road had taken on the ground. This check measurement revealed the cumulative error. The road had drifted east by 2 degrees, for example. Now came the moment of decision. Rather than trying to wrench the entire road back onto the original theoretical line with a jarring, sharp correction, the engineers often employed a subtle and elegant solution. They would introduce a gentle, imperceptible curve into the road's next segment, a compensation curve. This curve was not a mistake, but a deliberate, calculated bend designed to slowly, gracefully steer the road back toward its proper alignment over the next several miles. To a traveler walking or riding along it, the road would still feel perfectly straight. Only from a high vantage point or on a precise map would the gentle corrective arc become visible. This adaptive approach reveals a profound sophistication. It shows that ancient engineering was not a rigid, slavish adherence to a plan drawn on parchment. It was a dynamic conversation with the physical world, a process of constant feedback and intelligent adjustment. The goal was not geometric purity for its own sake, but functional integrity. The road needed to reach its destination efficiently and durably. If a slight, graceful curve could absorb the imperfections of human hands and still deliver that result, then that curve was a mark of wisdom, not of failure. This pragmatic flexibility is what allowed grand designs to succeed over vast distances. It acknowledged that tools and men could err, but that a deeper understanding of the system could compensate. The straight road, therefore, was never a single, unbroken line of thought. It was a series of aligned intentions, constantly checked against the stars and gently guided back on course, a testament to an engineering philosophy that valued resilient success over brittle perfection. The tools of the Roman surveyor did not rust away with the empire's decline. Their knowledge, meticulously recorded on scrolls and in the Corpus Agrimensorum, found refuge in the quiet scriptoria of medieval monasteries. Here, monks painstakingly copied and preserved these technical manuscripts, not for building roads, but as part of a sacred duty to safeguard all human learning. The straight line, once an instrument of imperial control, now slept peacefully on parchment, waiting for a world ready to use it again. That reawakening came with the Renaissance, a period obsessed with rediscovering classical wisdom. Scholars pored over these ancient surveying texts, recognizing in their geometric precision a power that went far beyond marking fields. They realized these same principles could be used to map not just a single estate, but the entire known world. The straight line was about to escape the page and conquer the globe. Early Renaissance cartographers faced the same fundamental challenge as the Roman agrimensor: how to accurately represent a curved, three-dimensional world on a flat, two-dimensional surface. Their solution was a direct inheritance. They adopted the method of triangulation, the very technique the Romans used with the Dioptra to measure across rivers. A mapmaker would begin by establishing a precisely measured baseline across a stretch of open country, just as the Romans did. From each end of this line, he would use a sighting instrument to measure the angles to a distant, prominent landmark, like a church spire or a mountain peak. This created a triangle with one known side. Using geometry, he could calculate the distance to that landmark without ever walking to it. That landmark then became a new point of certainty. From it, he could measure angles to other features, building a growing web of interconnected triangles that slowly, accurately, pinned down the shape of a coastline or the course of a river. This was not new science, it was ancient engineering repurposed for discovery. The instruments themselves evolved along this unbroken line. The medieval astrolabe, used by astronomers to measure the altitude of stars, was adapted by surveyors to measure horizontal angles on land, a direct descendant of the Dioptra's rotating disk. Later, in the 1600s, this lineage produced the theodolite, which combined the angle measuring of the Dioptra with the telescopic sight of the astrolabe, creating the definitive tool for land surveying for centuries to come. Every time a Renaissance cartographer plotted a city's position or a mountain range's outline using triangulation, he was speaking the silent language of the Roman road builder. This intellectual lineage had world-changing consequences. The quest to measure and define space linearly, born from the practical need for a straight road, now fueled the age of exploration. Accurate maps were the ultimate strategic asset. A nation that could reliably chart its own coasts could also chart new ones across the ocean. The same geometric discipline that ensured a Roman legion could march straight to a rebel fort now ensured a Portuguese caravel could plot a straight course, or as straight as the wind allowed, to the Indies. When explorers like John Cabot or Jacques Cartier mapped the coastlines of new continents, they did so using surveying techniques whose DNA can be traced back to the Agrimensor and his Groma. The straight line drawn across a desert to control a trade route had evolved into the room line drawn across a nautical chart to connect empires. This reveals a profound truth about human progress. Technological advance is rarely a series of isolated inventions. It is more often a slow, continuous repurposing. The geometry of property division became the geometry of road building, which then became the geometry of map making, which finally became the geometry of global navigation. Each application refined the tools and sharpened the principles, but the core idea remained steadfast that the chaotic, natural world could be understood, controlled, and connected through measured lines and calculated angles. The legacy of the straight road, therefore, is not merely found in ancient stones, but in the very lines of latitude and longitude that framed our first true picture of the planet. The theories of ancient surveying are compelling, but the true proof lies not in manuscripts but in the dirt. Across the landscapes once ruled by Rome, the silent, stubborn evidence of their methods has waited for centuries. Modern archaeology provides the final, crucial piece of the puzzle, allowing us to move from speculation to reconstruction, to see the ghost of the surveyor at work. One of the most telling discoveries is the surveyor's camp. These were not permanent settlements, but temporary, precise installations. Archaeologists have identified sites, often on high ground with clear vistas, marked by orderly arrangements of post holes. These holes correspond perfectly to the footprint of a large tent that would shelter the team and its instruments, and more importantly, to the positions where the heavy wooden tripods for the Groma or Dioptra were planted. The spacing and alignment of these holes often mirror the geometric patterns the surveyors were imposing on the land outside, a microcosm of their grand design. Even more direct are the termini, the boundary stones. These are not mere rocks but formal monuments, often inscribed with the name of the overseeing official, the date of the survey, and sometimes even a brief curse upon anyone who dared to move them. Finding such a stone still in its original position, perhaps at the corner of two long-vanished property lines, is like finding a single stitch still holding in a frayed tapestry. It proves the line was real, was measured, and was intended to be eternal. On rare, fortunate occasions, the tools themselves emerge. A bronze disc from a Dioptra, etched with finely graduated markings, was found in the ancient city of Pompeii. Fragments of carefully crafted plumb bobs made of lead or stone have been recovered from military sites. These objects are startlingly intimate. They bear the wear of hands and the nicks of use, directly connecting us to the individual who once peered along their sightlines. Yet the most overwhelming evidence requires no digging at all. It is visible from the window of an airplane. The roads themselves, in their relentless, unwavering straightness across impossible terrain, are the surveyor's ultimate signature. When you trace the path of the Via Appia as it arrows across the Pontine marshes, or follow a Roman road in northern England as it ignores the gentle curves of a river valley to march directly over hill and dale, you are seeing a decision made 2,000 years ago, frozen in stone. That persistence of line is a mathematical statement carved into the continent, a testament to a will that refused to be bent by geography. This physical evidence finds its voice in the recovered texts. The writings of men like Sextus Julius Frontinus, who served as Rome's water commissioner, provide the missing manual. In his work on aqueducts, he details the use of the Corobates, describing its construction and emphasizing that for precise work, nothing was more reliable than water. He gives us the why behind the what we find in the ground. By blending these literary sources with the archaeological record, we achieve something remarkable. We can reverse engineer their art. We can take a bronze disc, understand its markings from a text, place it on a tripod over a pattern of post holes, and sight along the same line their road still follows. This fusion of word and object allows us to reconstruct not just a tool, but a mindset, a process, a complete technical culture. It transforms silent stones and rusty metal into a living dialogue between the planner's intent and the worker's skilled execution, revealing the meticulous, human-scale genius that built an empire one straight line at a time. The straight line was a message written in stone for all to read. To walk or ride upon a Roman road was to experience a psychological shift as profound as the physical journey. Around you, the world might be a tangle of forests, a confusion of hills, or a trackless desert, a landscape governed by ancient, organic chaos. but beneath your feet and stretching to the horizon in both directions was a ribbon of absolute order. This contrast was deliberate and powerful. The road declared that human will and human reason could carve a permanent slice of predictability from the unpredictable earth. For the individuals who used it, this geometry translated directly into a new kind of confidence. A legionary on the march no longer had to worry about his column getting lost in a winding valley or slowed by uncertain terrain. The road offered a known quantity, a calculable rate of advance. He could predict with remarkable accuracy how many days it would take to reach a rebellious province or reinforce a distant fort. This turned military logistics from a gamble into a science, allowing Rome to project power over distances that would have paralyzed other empires. For the merchant, the psychological benefit was measured in profit and risk. A straight, well-maintained road meant reliable travel times for his goods. He could plan his shipments, calculate his costs, and meet his contracts with a new level of certainty. The road reduced the unknown variables of a journey, transforming commerce from a perilous adventure into a more routine and therefore expandable enterprise. It told him that the empire was not just a collection of conquered lands, but a unified, functioning system designed for movement. But the most potent message was for the people whose land the road now crossed. To a local farmer whose life was defined by the cycles of his fields and the footpaths of his ancestors, this stark, artificial line cutting across the familiar contours would have been an awe-inspiring and intimidating sight. It did not follow the river or respect the old tribal boundary. It ignored the local gods of the forest and the hill. It spoke a language of pure, impersonal geometry that was alien to the natural world. This was the inescapable symbol of imperial power, a daily, physical reminder that a new authority now organized this space. The road made the abstract idea of Rome tangible and unavoidable. It was always there, a constant demonstration that a distant emperor in a city thousands of miles away could reach into this very landscape and redefine it according to his own logic. The straight road reshaped the very perception of distance and connection. Before, two towns might be considered far apart because the journey between them was difficult, winding, and slow. The road collapsed that psychological distance. It created a new mental map where places were linked by a direct, efficient line, making the empire feel smaller, more manageable, and more tightly controlled. The surveying techniques we have explored then did far more than create a physical infrastructure of stone and gravel. They built a psychological infrastructure of order, predictability, and imperial presence. The unwavering line was a silent herald, announcing that chaos had been measured, that the wild had been tamed by reason, and that every step taken upon that firm, straight surface was a step taken within the rational mind of Rome itself. This legacy of the straight line, however, did not end at the empire's borders. Its influence traveled through time, shaping a concept so fundamental to our modern world that we rarely stop to consider its ancient geometric origins. The geometric will of Rome was not a solitary phenomenon. Across the globe and across centuries, other civilizations faced the same unforgiving landscapes and arrived at eerily similar conclusions. High in the Andes Mountains, the Inca Empire orchestrated one of history's most audacious road networks, with pathways often running in breathtakingly straight segments across sheer mountain faces. Without the wheel or iron tools, their methods were a brilliant adaptation of core principles. They constructed stone towers called huancas on high ridges. These were not watchtowers for soldiers but permanent surveying markers. By aligning one huanca with the next across a deep valley, engineers could project a straight visual line, a thread of intention across empty air. To measure distance and perhaps even record data, they may have used the quipu, a complex system of knotted cords. While its primary use was for accounting and narrative, the logical, mathematical structure of the quipu makes it a plausible tool for recording the lengths of road segments or the counts of labor crews, turning abstraction into a tangible, portable record. Their roads, built with fitted stone and supported by monumental retaining walls, seem to defy gravity itself, clinging to slopes where a single misstep could be fatal. This was surveying adapted to a vertical world, where the straight line was a declaration of dominion over the most formidable terrain on Earth. Far to the east during China's Qin dynasty, the drive for unification demanded its own arteries of control. The Emperor Qin Shi Huang, famous for his terracotta army, also initiated massive infrastructure projects, including straight roads known as speedways, to rapidly move troops and administrators. While detailed records are sparse, the technological sophistication of the era suggests methods that would feel familiar. Chinese engineers had long mastered precise leveling using water, and they employed sighting poles, perhaps topped with flags or lanterns for visibility over long distances. The famous straightness of some sections of the early Great Wall, which often follows ridge lines with geometric precision, hints at the same surveying discipline applied to road building. The goal was identical to Rome's, to collapse distance and impose a central authority's will upon a diverse and sprawling landscape. These parallel stories from mountains, deserts, and plains reveal a profound truth. The straight road is a convergent invention in human history. Isolated by continents and oceans, cultures with no possible contact each confronted the chaos of nature and responded with geometry. They all discovered that to control space, you must first define it with lines. They each learned that water finds its level, that a distant marker can anchor a direction, and that triangles can measure the unwalkable distance. The Roman Groma, the Inca Huanca, and the Chinese sighting pole are different answers to the same universal question: how do we make the world knowable and passable? This convergent evolution points to something fundamental in the human mind, a shared impulse to impose order, to seek efficiency, and to connect. It suggests that the straight line is less a cultural artifact and more a cognitive tool, a basic shape of organized thought that, when projected onto the land, becomes a road. Each civilization dressed this geometric skeleton in the materials and methods it had at hand: stone in the Andes, packed earth and gravel in China, layered stone and concrete in Rome. But the underlying skeleton, the unwavering line, was the same. This global tapestry of straight paths underscores that the urge to build them is a hallmark of complex society itself, a non-verbal language of power and connection spoken in dirt, stone, and ambition. Yet, with all this ancient precision achieved, one might wonder, how does it compare to our modern world of satellites and lasers? The story does not end with the last Roman mile marker. It simply changes scale, reaching from the surface of the Earth to the space around it. The principles that guided a Roman surveyor across a desert are the same ones that guide a satellite in orbit today. The fundamental goal is timeless: to know exactly where you are and to plot exactly where you need to go. The tools, however, have transformed beyond ancient recognition. That elegant bronze Dioptra with its sighting tube and graduated disc did not vanish. It evolved. Over centuries, it gained precision optics and fine adjustment screws, becoming the theodolite, the workhorse of land surveying for hundreds of years. This instrument could measure horizontal and vertical angles with breathtaking accuracy, but it still required a human eye to peer through its lens and a measured chain to be laid out on the ground to determine distance. Then came another leap, the invention of electronic distance measurement. Instead of a team painstakingly laying metal chains end to end, a surveyor could now point an infrared or laser beam at a reflector, press a button, and receive an exact distance reading in seconds. This fused with the theodolite to create the total station, a single instrument that could capture angles and distances simultaneously, digitizing the landscape point by point. Yet the most profound revolution came from above, not with a sighting pole, but with a constellation of artificial stars. The Global Positioning System, GPS, represents the ultimate abstraction of the ancient desire for celestial guidance. Instead of relying on the fixed pole star, a modern receiver listens to the synchronized signals from multiple satellites, each broadcasting its position and the precise time. By calculating the minute differences in how long those signals take to arrive, the receiver can triangulate its own position on the Earth's surface, often within a few centimeters. It is instant global centuriation, a grid of position available to anyone with a smartphone. But here is the crucial link. The logical skeleton beneath all this technological flesh remains remarkably familiar. Before a modern engineer uses GPS to map a new highway, they must first establish a network of permanent, precisely known control points, the direct descendants of the boundary stones planted by the Agrimensor. They still begin major projects by measuring a highly accurate baseline, just as the Romans did, though now with laser interferometry instead of wooden rods. And when they process their data, they perform complex error adjustment calculations, a sophisticated, computerized version of the gentle compensation curves used to steer a Roman road back on course after miles of minor drift. The language has changed from Latin to binary, but the grammar of geometry is identical. Understanding the Groma and the Corobates does more than satisfy historical curiosity. It gives us a deep appreciation for the intellectual foundations of our own world. Every modern civil engineering project, every geospatial map on your phone, every plotted course for an autonomous vehicle, rests upon a conceptual framework built 2,000 years ago. It is a framework that says the world can be measured, that space can be defined by points and lines, and that those abstract definitions can be made physically real. The straight line drawn across a desert was the first line of code in the program that now runs our built environment. This continuity from cord and stone to satellite and silicon is a testament not just to human ingenuity, but to the enduring power of a simple, profound idea that to shape our world, we must first learn to see its invisible lines. But the idea of a perfectly straight road, unwavering from horizon to horizon, is itself a modern myth. The reality is far more interesting and speaks volumes about Roman practicality. Their roads were not laser straight for hundreds of miles without interruption. They were instead a brilliant series of long, straight segments, each one a triumph of surveying, connected by deliberate, gentle curves. The true skill lay not in defying geography at all costs, but in making those straight sections as long as humanly possible, and the transitions between them so smooth a traveler would scarcely notice the bend. When a major, immovable obstacle presented itself, a sheer cliff face, an impassable swamp, or a mountain too steep to climb directly, the Roman engineer did not stubbornly order his legionaries to tunnel through it. He made a calculated decision. Using his Dioptra, he would survey the best way around, plotting a new course that minimized added distance while maintaining a manageable grade. At the point where the road needed to turn, he would introduce a gradual curve, a wide arc designed for the pace of ox carts and marching columns. This curve was engineered, not accidental. It was part of the plan from the very first stake driven into the ground. This nuanced approach reveals a critical truth about Roman engineering. They were pragmatic, not dogmatic. Their core value was efficiency, not geometric purity. A road that took a slight detour to avoid a year of brutal rock cutting was a smarter investment. A gentle curve that allowed a steady pace was more efficient than a series of sharp, jarring turns that would break axles and exhaust men. They understood the balance between the ideal line on a map and the real cost in labor, time, and materials. This balanced, flexible thinking is a key reason their network was so successful and so enduring. It was built to be used, not just admired. The roads were resilient because they worked with the landscape when necessary, not against it in a futile display of force. The long, straight segments delivered the speed and predictability the empire demanded, while the thoughtful curves absorbed the realities of an imperfect world, creating a system that was both ambitious and astonishingly sensible. This legacy of adaptive precision raises a final, compelling question about the human story behind these stones. We have followed the lines they drew, but what of the hands that drew them? A road that lasts 1,000 years does not fight the land, it listens to it. The ancient surveyor's first act was not to impose his will, but to read the story written in the soil, the rock, and the flow of water. His technical brilliance was matched by a deep, pragmatic sensitivity to the environment. Before a single line was plotted with the Groma, he would walk the proposed route, observing not just direction, but the very character of the earth beneath his feet. He was performing a kind of early environmental assessment, a survey of sustainability written in the language of survival and efficiency. His primary concern was water, the great destroyer of all human works. He knew that a road must not just be straight and level, it must shed water like a duck's back. So he sought out natural ridges and high ground, not merely for the clear line of sight they offered his instruments, but because they provided natural drainage. A road built along a subtle spine of land would allow rainwater to run off harmlessly to either side, preventing the pooling and erosion that would quickly turn a path into a muddy trench. Conversely, he learned to read the signs of a floodplain, the telltale silt deposits, the specific types of vegetation, and the wide, flat basins where rivers would periodically reclaim their territory. Placing a road here would be an act of folly, guaranteeing constant repair and seasonal isolation. So his straight line would make a deliberate, calculated bend to climb to safer, firmer ground, trading a minor detour for centuries of stability. The foundation itself was a dialogue with geology. Where possible, he sought out the agar, the firm, natural subsoil, often a layer of gravel or bedrock. This was the land's own offering of stability. Building directly upon this meant the road's immense weight would be borne by the earth's strongest bones, preventing subsidence and cracking. In swampy areas like the Pontine marshes, this meant not building on the bog at all, but constructing an elevated causeway that floated above the instability. This approach reveals a profound wisdom. These engineers were not conquerors blindly overruling nature with sheer force. They were integrators seeking the path of least resistance within their grand design. They aimed to weave their road into the existing tapestry of the landscape, using its own strengths to their advantage. A road that followed a natural ridge used the land's own shape for drainage. A road that crossed a river at a narrow, rocky point used the land's own structure for a stable bridge foundation. This was sustainability born of stark necessity. Every hour of labor, every cartload of stone was precious. A road that required constant, backbreaking maintenance was a failed road, a drain on the empire's resources rather than a conduit for its strength. By choosing alignments that worked with hydrological and geological forces, they minimized that future burden exponentially. The result is visible in roads that still trace the high ground across continents, their foundations undisturbed by millennia of floods, their surfaces spared the relentless scouring of uncontrolled water. This environmental intelligence was the silent partner to their geometric genius. It meant their magnificent straight lines were not fragile scratches on the Earth's surface, but durable inscriptions, carved with such respect for the medium that the land itself became a co-author in their endurance. This legacy of listening raises a final, humanizing thought. We have traced the lines of geometry and the contours of the land, but what of the countless unnamed individuals whose hands and hearts translated these brilliant plans into enduring stone? The unwavering geometry of a Roman road translated directly into the most universal of languages, prophet. Every carefully measured mile and every precisely calculated gradient was an investment that paid dividends in the efficiency of commerce. By ruthlessly eliminating unnecessary distance, these straight roads slashed travel times, turning a journey that might have taken weeks along meandering tracks into a matter of days. But the savings were not measured in time alone. A smoother, firmer roadbed meant dramatically less wear on wooden wheels and axles. A cart that might have broken down 3 times on a rough path could now complete its journey intact, saving merchants the immense cost of lost goods, repairs, and delays. This reliability was the bedrock of long-distance trade. Even more critical was the work of the Corobates, the water level. A surveyor who ensured a road had a consistent, gentle slope was doing more than solving a drainage problem. He was directly increasing cargo capacity. On a steep, uneven track, a cart pulled by oxen could carry only a light load before the animals became exhausted, or the descent became dangerously uncontrollable. On a Roman road with its engineered gradient, that same cart could be loaded to its structural limits. The surveyor's precision had effectively created a multiplier for hauling power, allowing a single merchant to move more olive oil, more grain, or more blocks of marble with the same effort and cost. This is why the state invested so heavily in high-precision surveying. It was not an abstract pursuit of geometric beauty, it was a calculated economic strategy. The straight line was a profit line. It enabled the large-scale, predictable movement of staples like Egyptian grain to feed the population of Rome, Spanish olive oil to light its lamps, and Greek marble to build its monuments. By connecting disparate markets into a single, fluid network, these roads turned local surpluses into imperial commodities, stabilizing prices and generating tax revenue at a scale previously unimaginable. The surveyor's cord and level were, in effect, the tools that built an integrated Mediterranean economy, transforming geometric precision into the ultimate commercial advantage. A straight line is more than a path, it is a statement. The relentless geometry of the Roman road spoke a silent language understood by every citizen, soldier, and subject. It was the physical embodiment of Romanitas, the complex ideal of Romanness. This was not merely about being from Rome, it was about embodying a set of virtues, order, reason, discipline, and an unshakable faith in human-made systems over natural chaos. Where the world beyond the empire was portrayed as wild, unpredictable, and barbaric, the road was a sliver of perfect human-imposed logic. It was civilization itself, rendered in gravel and stone, cutting through the untamed forests and across the trackless moors. To travel upon it was to walk within the Roman mind, to experience a world where confusion was replaced by clarity, and where purpose had a direct, unwavering trajectory. This symbolism resonated deeply in Roman thought and art. Poets and philosophers used the straight road as a powerful metaphor for moral and intellectual life. The poet Horace famously wrote of the Via Media, the middle way, a straight path of moderation and virtue avoiding the extremes on either side. For the Stoic philosophers, the road to wisdom was depicted as a long, straight, and difficult path that required constant discipline to stay upon. The very act of staying on course, of not deviating into the wilderness of passion or error, was a moral victory. The surveyor's technical achievement, therefore, provided the culture with a perfect, tangible image for abstract ideals. The straight road told a story about human potential. It argued that through reason and will, one could plot a direct course through life's complexities toward a defined and honorable destination. The ideological power of this line extended to the empire's self-image. Building these roads was an act of what we might now call environmental determinism. It declared that the landscape would not dictate terms to Rome. Rome would dictate terms to the landscape. The straight road crossing a mountain pass was a victory monument, not to a defeated army but to a conquered geography. It demonstrated that no natural obstacle was insurmountable to Roman engineering and Roman will. For the conquered peoples living alongside these new arteries, the message was inescapable and daily. The old, winding paths of their ancestors, which followed the logic of local streams and ancestral hunting grounds, were now framed as primitive and inefficient. The new, rational line from elsewhere represented the future, a future authored by Rome. This was infrastructure as propaganda, a constant, quiet reinforcement of who was in charge and what their values were. Thus, the surveying techniques we have explored did far more than enable efficient travel. They manufactured a powerful cultural narrative. The Groma and Corobates were tools of ideology as much as engineering. They took the core values of the society, clarity, order, and direct purpose, and etched them permanently onto the face of the earth. Every journey became a lesson in Roman virtue. Every milestone passed was a reminder of systematic control. The road was a promise that the world could be made rational, measurable, and safe for the legions, the merchants, and the ideas of Rome. It transformed the very concept of distance from a fearful unknown into a manageable, calculated space, shrinking the empire psychologically even as it expanded it physically. The straight line, therefore, was the ultimate cultural icon, a symbol so potent that its meaning was built into its very form, compelling not just movement but belief. Yet for all we have reconstructed, genuine mysteries remain. Our understanding of these ancient techniques is a mosaic, brilliantly clear in some places and frustratingly fragmented in others. Take the simple, practical challenge of a wide, fast-moving river. We know the theory of triangulation, how a surveyor could calculate the width from one bank. But the physical act of transferring that perfect line across the water, of planting the first stake precisely on the opposite shore to continue the road's march, involved steps we can only infer. Did they use small boats carefully aligned from both banks? Did they wait for a rare dry season or a natural ford? The manuals are silent on these gritty, vital logistics. Even more elusive are their precise mathematical protocols. They clearly had methods to correct the inevitable drift over distance, but what specific formulas did they use to calculate those gentle compensation curves? Were these rules of thumb passed down orally from master to apprentice, or were they part of a written, technical tradition now lost to time? For some tools, like certain intricate bronze discs found in excavations, archaeologists can only hypothesize about their exact function in the field. These are not failures of research but invitations. They are the open questions that keep history alive. This is where experimental archaeology becomes a powerful form of time travel. Modern researchers build precise replicas of the Groma and Dioptra, taking them into the countryside to see just how accurate they can be over a mile or 5 miles using only period techniques. Enthusiasts and citizen scientists participate in projects that test pacing methods or celestial alignments, contributing real data to centuries-old debates. Each of these experiments is a conversation with the past, a way of asking the long silent surveyors, "Is this how you did it?" The story of these straight roads, therefore, is not a puzzle we have solved. It is an ongoing dialogue. Every satellite image that reveals a forgotten alignment, every newly analyzed soil layer along a via, every successful field test with a replica Corobates adds another piece. We are still learning their language, still tracing the lines they left, not just in stone, but in the very way we think about measuring and shaping our world. The true legacy of these techniques is that they remind us our ancestors were not primitive, but profoundly ingenious problem solvers, whose full ingenuity we are only beginning to appreciate. The plumb line of the Groma and the still water of the Corobates were whispers of a deeper truth, that the world could be understood through simple, observable laws. This was the quiet genius that built the roads upon which history marched. We have traced a line from the surveyor's stake to the stars, from the geometry of a triangle to the governance of an empire. These techniques were not isolated tricks, but a cohesive system of thought, a marriage of astronomy for direction, geometry for measurement, and relentless human discipline for execution. They allowed civilizations to project their will across continents, transforming the chaotic, organic landscape into a network of rational, predictable connections. The legacy of those straight lines is etched far deeper than ancient stone. It lives on in the property boundaries that still follow Roman grids, in the cartographic principles that first mapped the globe, and in the very expectation that a journey should have a reliable, direct path. These roads were the physical manifestation of order, ambition, and a profound desire to connect. They shrank psychological distance, fueled economic engines, and broadcast an ideology of human reason triumphant over natural chaos. If this exploration of ancient ingenuity has sparked your curiosity, we would love to hear which technique left you most amazed. Was it the celestial navigation, the elegant simplicity of the water level, or the human chain of sighting poles? Share your thoughts in the comments below. For more journeys into the forgotten innovations that built our world, subscribe and join us as we continue to uncover the historical mysteries written not just in books, but in the very ground beneath our feet.